People started laughing when Abigail Mercer began shrinking her windows. Not literally shrinking them, building around them. One by one, she stacked heavy stone around every window frame on her cabin until the openings sat buried inside thick, recessed walls. From the road, the cabin started looking strange. The windows looked sunken, hidden, almost like someone had pushed them backward into the house itself. Jonas Hale rode by one afternoon and stared for several seconds before finally shaking his head. "What happened to your windows?" Abigail climbed down from a ladder carrying another stone. "Nothing," Jonas pointed. "No, something definitely happened." Several men behind him laughed. "Looks like she's building little caves around the glass. Maybe she's hiding from sunlight. Hope she still remembers where the windows are." Abigail ignored them and carried another stone toward the cabin. Because unlike everyone else, she wasn't building for summer. She was building for January. 3 winters earlier, cold nearly killed her younger brother Thomas. Not from lack of food. Not from lack of firewood. From windows. Their old cabin held heat reasonably well everywhere except beside the glass. Every winter, frost formed thick along the window edges. Ice crept inward across the panes like white branches spreading through the night. Cold air pooled around them. Warmth escaped through them. And every morning, Thomas slept wrapped beneath extra blankets because his bed sat nearest one of the windows. By February, he developed a terrible cough that lasted nearly 2 months. Abigail never forgot it. Ever since then, windows bothered her. Everyone treated them as unavoidable weaknesses, places where winter simply won. She didn't like that answer. Months earlier, during summer, a traveling stone mason stayed briefly in the valley while repairing chimneys near the southern farms. Over supper one evening, he described old mountain homes farther north where windows sat deeply recessed within thick stone walls. The design wasn't built only for strength. It protected warmth. Cold wind couldn't strike glass directly. Air movement slowed around openings while deeper wall structures reduced heat escaping through exposed surfaces. Most people ignored the story. Abigail didn't, because she remembered Thomas coughing beside frozen glass. That memory stayed with her. So when autumn arrived, she started gathering stone. Hundreds of pieces. Flat stone from riverbanks. Field stone from hillsides. Cut blocks purchased from old quarry workers. Slowly she built thick stone surrounds around every cabin window. Not sealing them, protecting them. Each opening sat deeper inside the wall structure, while angled stone edges extended outward around the frames. People laughed harder every week, especially after the front windows disappeared several feet inside stone recesses. Children called them tunnel windows. Others called them owl holes. Jonas visited while Abigail adjusted mortar around one of the finished frames. He stared carefully at the nearest window. The glass sat far back inside thick stone walls now, almost hidden beneath the deep opening. "You know, people usually build windows to get more light." Abigail smiled faintly. "I still have windows." Jonas folded his arms. "Barely." She brushed mortar dust from her gloves. "Cold reaches less glass this way." Jonas frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Abigail pointed toward the opening. "Wind hits the stone first." He looked closer. The deep stone frame surrounded nearly every edge of exposed glass. Sharp wind could no longer strike directly against the window surface from most directions. Snow would drift differently too. Cold air movement around the openings slowed dramatically. Simple, but strange looking. Jonas still laughed softly. "Seems like a lot of work for windows." Abigail looked toward the mountains. "Seems like less work than freezing." Jonas had heard that sort of answer before from people who built strange things. Usually they were wrong. Still, he touched the stone beside the window. Heavy, solid, purposeful, and despite himself, he looked thoughtful before leaving. By late autumn, the project finished. Abigail's cabin looked completely different now. Stone framed every opening deeply beneath thick surrounds extending outward from the walls. The place looked older somehow. Stronger, like part of the hillside itself. The first hard freeze arrived before November ended. Temperatures dropped sharply overnight, while icy wind rolled down from northern ridges. By morning, people noticed familiar winter problems returning. Frost around windows. Frozen corners. Ice gathering along interior glass. Abigail noticed something too. Or rather, she noticed something missing. No frost. She stared at the kitchen window for nearly a minute. Nothing. No white crystals around edges. No thin ice spreading across corners. The glass remained clear. At first she assumed the weather simply wasn't cold enough. Then temperatures dropped farther. Still nothing. She touched the glass carefully. Cold, but not painfully cold. And more importantly, no freezing air spilled into the room beneath it. The stone surround slowed direct exposure dramatically while reducing heat loss around the window edges. The difference wasn't enormous, but it mattered, especially during long winters. Weeks later, Jonas stopped by carrying a sack of dried apples. The moment he stepped inside, he frowned, then looked around, then frowned again. Abigail looked up. What? Jonas stared toward the windows. Where's the frost? Abigail smiled. Because outside, snow covered the valley. Inside most cabins, ice had already started forming along glass edges. But her windows remained clear. Jonas walked toward one carefully. Touched it. Stared. Touched it again. That's impossible. Abigail said nothing. Because winter hadn't truly arrived yet. And the real test still waited. By January, temperatures collapsed harder than anyone expected. Wind tore through the valley daily while snowstorms arrived one after another. Cabin windows across town disappeared behind sheets of frost thick enough people scraped them each morning with knives. People stuffed blankets around frames, hung extra coverings, burned more wood, fought harder. But Abigail noticed something strange. Her windows still stayed mostly clear. Then the weather warning came. An enormous freeze rolled south from the mountains carrying temperatures colder than anything seen in decades. Old men reinforced shutters. Families stacked wood indoors. People prepared desperately. Because everyone understood one thing. The real winter was coming. And finally, Abigail's windows would face their true test. The freeze arrived during the night. No wind at first. No snow. Just cold. The kind that settled over the valley silently and changed everything before sunrise. Abigail noticed it the moment she woke. The cabin felt different. Not colder. Quieter. Outside, frost had covered nearly every surface in white crystal, while the air itself seemed sharper somehow. She walked toward the kitchen window slowly, then stopped. The glass remained clear. Perfectly clear. Beyond it, she could see pale morning light spreading across snow-covered fields. No ice. No frozen corners. No white branches crawling across the panes. Nothing. Abigail touched the glass carefully. Cold, but not painfully cold. More importantly, no freezing air spilled inward around the frame. The stone surrounds had already begun doing exactly what she hoped. Outside, the deep window wells blocked direct wind while trapped air inside the recessed spaces created a buffer between the brutal cold and the glass itself. The stone absorbed temperature changes slowly, shielding the window edges from sudden freezing. Simple. Ancient. Working. By midday, the valley began struggling. Doors froze shut. Water buckets cracked. Chimneys smoked poorly beneath dense cold air. And windows turned white. House after house disappeared behind frost. People scraped ice from glass with knives just to let daylight inside. Children pressed hands against windows and pulled them back immediately from the cold. Mrs. Carter later said it felt like winter had climbed into her house through the walls, but mostly through the windows, because windows always lost first. Always. Until now. Late that afternoon, pounding struck Abigail's door. Jonas Hale stumbled inside, carrying a shovel. Snow clung to his coat and beard. The moment he stepped into the room, he looked toward the windows automatically, then froze. For several seconds, he just stared. Clear glass. Sunlight. No frost. No blankets hanging over frames. No ice. Jonas walked toward the nearest window slowly. Touched the edge. Then touched the center. Then stared harder. That's not possible. Abigail poured coffee quietly. Jonas looked back. No, seriously. He pointed. Everyone's windows froze solid this morning. Abigail handed him a cup. These didn't. Jonas looked at the deep stone opening surrounding the glass. Outside, the window sat recessed nearly 3 feet beneath heavy stone. Wind barely reached it directly. Snow drifted differently around it too. Instead of blasting across exposed glass, cold air slowed and curled harmlessly along the stone edges. Jonas ran his hand across the frame. You actually did something. Abigail raised an eyebrow. What exactly did you think I was doing? He didn't answer. Because honestly, he wasn't sure. The freeze worsened to the second day. Temperatures dropped lower than anyone remembered. Cabins fought desperately. People hung blankets over windows and stuffed cracks with cloth. Ice gathered thick enough inside some homes that daylight barely passed through. Wood consumption doubled in several houses. People fed stoves constantly and still woke shivering. But Abigail's cabin remained different. Not warm exactly. Steady. Balanced. The windows no longer acted like open doors letting winter inside. Heat stayed where it belonged. By evening another knock came. Mrs. Carter entered carrying a lantern. Then the Millers arrived. Then Jonas again. Not because their homes had failed. Because they wanted to see. They stood inside the cabin, looking around with quiet expressions. Then all of them drifted toward the windows. Clear. Every one of them. Mrs. Carter touched the glass slowly. My windows look like frozen rivers. Jonas looked toward Abigail. You knew this would happen? Abigail shook her head. No, you didn't. I hoped. Silence settled across the room. Because outside, winter had become something brutal. But inside here, daylight still entered. Warmth still remained. People could still see the world beyond the glass. That mattered more than anyone expected. Children no longer sat beside dark frozen windows. No one scraped ice every morning. No one watched heat disappear into white-covered glass. For the first time, the windows had stopped being weaknesses. The freeze continued nearly a week. Then snowstorms arrived behind it. Heavy ones. The valley disappeared beneath white. But Abigail's windows stayed clear. Not perfectly. Thin edges gathered frost occasionally during the coldest nights. But compared to every neighboring home, the difference felt unbelievable. Word spread quickly. Because people notice comfort during hard winters. And they notice anything that saves wood. By the time temperatures finally rose again, half the valley had visited Abigail's cabin. Not to laugh. To measure. To ask questions. To understand. Jonas stood outside one afternoon during the first spring thaw staring at the deep stone window surrounds. Snow melted steadily from rooftops around them. Water dripped softly from branches overhead. He shook his head slowly. You know what bothers me? Abigail smiled. What? I spent all autumn laughing. Several workers nearby chuckled softly. Jonas pointed toward the windows. And now I can't stop thinking about doing the same thing to my house. Abigail laughed quietly. Because across the valley, people had already started gathering stone. Small piles first, then larger ones. By summer, cabins throughout the valley began changing. Window wells deepened. Stone surrounds appeared. Openings grew more protected. Not because Abigail invented anything new. Because she remembered something everyone else ignored. One evening near sunset, Abigail stood beside the kitchen window, watching light spill across distant snowfields. The glass remained clear. Still, steady. No frost. No ice. Just light. She remembered Thomas coughing beside frozen windows years earlier. Remembered scraping ice every morning. Remembered accepting winter as something unavoidable. Then she looked toward neighboring homes where stone now rose around fresh window frames all across the valley. And finally she smiled. Because sometimes surviving winter wasn't about building bigger fires. Sometimes it was simply about closing the doors winter had always used.